Apatros.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and whenever I'm in this part of the galaxy, I listen to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Makes flying a little more tolerable. Don't tell Anakin.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode features the first installment of the podcast book club as we read Darth Bane, Path of Destruction over the course of this year. And I'm really excited to get into this. I know a lot of you have reached out and said that you're excited to be a part of this as well. So, here we go. But Jay, you want to go ahead and give everyone our social media contacts before we get started?
Would love to. So we are on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So again, this is the discussion of the first book in the Darth Bane trilogy, which is called Path of Destruction, and it was written by Drew Karpyshyn. And we'll be covering the prologue in chapters 1 through 3. Real quick, Jay, I'm going to let you lead the discussion because you put together a really fantastic slab of notes here. But one of the things we just don't have in here is kind of what our experience with this book is. We've talked about it here and there over the course of the podcast, and we've both talked about how big of fans we are in this. I know you've read this book and this trilogy more than I have. What do you remember about the when this book came out, how you got into it, how many times you read it? What's your experience overall with this book?
Oh yeah, I guess you could say I'm a little obsessed with the Darth Bane trilogy. And I think a lot of it comes down to when I got back into Star Wars fandom after having some kids and some medical issues in my 30s and yada, yada, yada. I was really thirsting for a lot of Star Wars stories. And so I actually joined a a book club called the Science Fiction Book Club. And it was where you could pick out, like you would get your monthly features, kind of like you remember the old album
Right.
clubs that you could be part of. So, if you wanted your selection of the month, you could take it or pass it, and then you'd build up credits and all these things. And so I just happened to, run across some of these old Republic things. And I was like, ooh, this one sounds really, really good. So I picked up all 3 of the books from Science Fiction Book Club. And then I read all 3 of them. I just gobbled them up. And I remember specifically it was back in 2006 because I was having finger surgery. And so, it was when I was just getting through a lot of that kind of stuff. And so once I went through and I read all the books, I ended up just really being enamored with the whole dark side, the rule of 2, and I was really just sucked in by the characters. And then I found Audible, a few years later, and it was part of the, Audible offerings. And Jonathan Davis, who is the narrator for these books, just does such a phenomenal job of bringing Darth Bane to life. And I think that's probably one of the reasons too that I've remained such a big fan of these stories, is just because of the way that not only Drew Karpyshyn wrote these novels, but also the way that Jonathan Davis narrated them. And so I've often shared the story of how every summer I listen to all 3 of the books. And so that's just sort of been my personal, tradition from then on, is just to listen to them every single year. So I've probably read these books, gosh, I would say at least 7 or 8 times all the way
Yeah.
through. And I'm still finding things here and there that I pick up on. So, it's just like us watching the movies over and over again. But what's your experience? What's your background?
Well, I'm trying to remember exactly how the timeline worked out because when did these come out? I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I had played the Old Republic video games, or at least the first one. And I remember there being some buzz around this book, how one of the guys who wrote the story for the Old Republic, Knights of the Old Republic, had written this book. And I remember also hearing some buzz that it was good. And having been a fan of that, it's like, I'll check this out. And so I did pick it up and just consumed the first book. And then as the second and third novel in the series came out, picked them up and read them right away as well. And like you, eventually, when they came out on Audible, I listened to them that way. And I know I've read the books at least 3 times, I think, if not 4 or 5. It's just that I've read so many Star Wars books and several of them over again. I can't remember precisely how many times I've read these. And then when my oldest got older and was into Star Wars and stuff like this, and he played the Old Republic game, I suggested this to him, and he devoured it, and devoured all 3 of them and loved them. We talked about them quite a bit and occasionally still do from time to time. And one of the things I remember about the very first time that you and I talked is that we had invited you onto our old podcast before you were a full-time host, Starship Sabers and Scoundrels, and we were covering Rogue One after it had been in theaters. And after we were done recording that episode, we were all just chatting, and the conversation somehow landed on Darth Bane. And we talked about that for like 30 minutes right then. And then we formulated the plan to read those books over the summer. And so this is not the first time you and I have talked about this book. We talked about in well-full swoop over the course of an hour on our old podcast back in, gosh, that would have been 2017 that happened. So nearly 9 years ago at this point. But at any rate, so, that book is partly why you and I are still podcasting together today.
It's true.
Yeah. And so it is an incredible story. I don't want to get caught up in the whole ring theory discussion, but there are themes that Drew and I'm calling him Drew because not that I know him, but it's easier than pronouncing his last name, which I'm never convinced I'm doing correctly. But he borrows some themes from the prequels and he pulls things in from the Old Republic, Knights of the Old Republic video game and elsewhere, and blends them in perfectly, and so well sets this in the Star Wars galaxy and its own little niche of the Star Wars timeline. It's just fantastic. I love the journey of our protagonist. Bane is not a good person. He is not a good guy, but he is the protagonist. And so you can have some empathy for him and the journey he takes and some of the things that happens to him that gets him on this path. But it's just a fascinating story. And so I've been really excited. And we were thinking about ways to, I don't want to say change up the show this year, but enhance the idea. We cover a lot of books, but it was like, well, we love this one so much. Why not spend more time with it over the course of the year? So that's how we fell on the book club. And I'm really glad we did.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, I think that this is one of those types of stories that even though it's not considered canon, it still enamors so many fans, and it's never gonna go away in the place of, how high it's placed in the fandom. And, as you said, there's so many of our listeners out there that are excited for this book series, and so welcome aboard because we're gonna have a great time.
Yeah. Whether you've read it before or this is your first time, thanks for joining us, and I think you're going to get a kick out of this. All right. Well, like I said, I'm going to let you lead the conversation here, but I've worked up a summary. I'm going to read that real quick of what's going on in this prologue in the first 3 chapters. And it goes as follows. In the opening chapters of Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, we find Des, a miner working for the ORR Corporation on the world of Apatros. While working in the mines of Apatros, a fellow miner attempts to take over, harvesting ore from a Cartosis vein after Des's drill breaks down. Des resists and soon maims his fellow miner and is sent back to the workers' village as a punishment. Des decides to make the most of his unexpected free time and heads to the cantina to play sabacc against some revisiting Republic soldiers. And while they play, they discuss the war between the Republic and the Jedi on one side and the Sith on the other, and things are beginning to heat up. So there we go. That's what happened in the first couple of chapters in a nutshell. Where do we start, Jay?
Well, I think that we should probably start with, going back into the prologue where we're first introduced to the idea of what the Sith are at this point in history.
Mhm.
Because as we know from canon and from the movies and that type of thing, always too, there are no more, no less. And we get a very different framing for what the Sith are like in this particular era. And, as we know, Darth Bane does go on to establish the rule of two. So this is the genesis of that and where that actually comes from.
Mhm.
So, let's talk a little bit about the Sith as this legion. It's got some structure and some hierarchy here. We've got a few key characters that are introduced to us right away. We've got Lord Khan, who's a human Sith master, and he's founder of the Brotherhood of Darkness. We have Cordus, who is also a human Sith Lord, and then Kopej, who is a Twi'lek or Twi'lek, as they say in the novel, Sith Lord.
Mhm.
So they are in battle with the Jedi, and they are trying to basically gain power through this legion, and they want to get back to their homeworld of Korriban, which is essentially the birthplace of the Sith. So let's just talk a little bit about the structure of the Sith here and our first glimpses into what this structure is like, and maybe compare and contrast a little to what we now know of the Sith to be true. So what was it that struck you about that initial discussion of the way that the Sith are structured in this particular story?
Well, it's kind of funny. If this was anything other than Star Wars, this notion of that the Brotherhood of Darkness would be like the most on the nose kind of laughable thing because, it's kind of like, the agents of evil or whatever, in a James Bond story or something like that. But they call themselves the Brotherhood of Darkness. And it's because they follow the dark side and they don't view that as like an evil, sinister type of a thing. But it's this really kind of like fledgling uncomfortable alliance that they've got. Like you mentioned, they used to be in competition with each other for who would be at the top of the hierarchy, but they've put that all aside for the greater bad. I can't say the greater good, but
Love that.
the the greater well-being of the Sith Order to confront the Jedi and the Republic and try and take over the galaxy. But there they are on Korriban. They've taken the place over. They're talking about reestablishing their academy, and they're all being like persnickety with each other about like the way they say things about getting, we'll start sending new trainees to my academy, your academy, that type of
Mhm.
stuff here. And so it's still new and it's still kind of fragile for them. And they're kind of reminding each other that we're allies now, right? We're going to get along. This is for the betterment of everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and it's such a different way of looking at the Sith because of course we've always understood, like we said, the two, no more, no less. And here we have this whole hierarchy, and they are very much these harbingers of death in a lot of ways. And so they have this new academy that they're starting on Korriban here, which is, like I said, the home place or the birthplace of the Sith. And so they're trying to create this army to combat the Jedi and basically take over, whatever it is in the galaxy, which, the whole thing between the Republic and the Sith, they've been in this long grinding war for a really, really long time. And, it kind of struck me, why? Is it all just really about power in terms of the land that they own? Is it truly a fight against light versus dark? When we meet these Sith masters for the first time, they very much remind me of, I know you don't watch Twilight, you haven't been a Twilight fan, but the Volturi, the kind of snubbing their nose at everyone else, and we're better
Mhm.
than you, and we have all of this going for us kind of thing. So, why do you think that this Republic slash Sith war has been going on for so long?
Well, the after this prologue, we got 3 chapters, and it's really the end of the second and the third that I think kind of start to answer your question. And
Mhm.
that is that, they make allusions to what came before, hundreds of years before when Darth Revan was conquering the galaxy under a different Sith Empire at the time. And basically, what happened with the Sith then was so bad that the Jedi and the Republic outlawed the dark side, outlawed the Sith, outlawed these type of teachings. And
Yes.
so there's just absolutely zero tolerance for it. The problem is that just like in the prequels, there's a certain amount of corruption that's settled into the Republic. The farther you get away from the core and Coruscant, the looser things are, and the more people get taken advantage of. And we'll sure get into this later in the discussion. And so it's become a breeding ground for the discontented here, and the Sith are taking advantage of that. Where we know their code, which is based off of strength and their chains being broken and getting freedom and the like, and that appeals to so many people. So you've got the Republic zealots that are trying to destroy the Sith for no other reason that it's been outlawed, and they're not even hearing their grievances, not even hearing or understanding why people would support them, versus the Sith who are taking advantage of the discontent that's settled over portions of the galaxy by those who feel neglected by the Republic.
No, I think you nailed it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so let's switch our focus. And I do want to put a pin in the whole like world building thing that you were just
Mhm.
talking about as well. But let's switch our focus now to Des himself. So we get introduced to Dessel in the mines on doing the cortosis. And so what were your first impressions of Des as a character and the way that he was portrayed?
Well, it's a character, he's on the cover of this book. Of course, this is our baby Darth Bane, so to speak. And the situation, he's like what, 20ish or so, in his early 20s at this point.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he's grown up in the mines, and he is slaved away at this. And when we meet him, he's working a vein of cortosis, and this is a metal that you basically just have to attack with brute force because it's resistant to heat and blaster bolts and the like that, which is why it's so valuable. And a lot of people use it against the Jedi because it can short out their sabers. In fact, we got a little bit of that in the Acolyte, right? But
Mhm.
at any rate, and the miners, despite the fact that they're all being oppressed by the same corporation, they're competing with each other for whatever funds as they wage their never ending battle against debt, the corporate debt that they find themselves in subject to. And he's just kind of like, he's determined in this situation, which is he knows that the debt is insurmountable, but he's got to play this game. And this is all unspoken. It's kind of like the things that he's thinking over the course of these chapters. And so he's also he's got to stand up to everything around him. He's got to make his place in the galaxy. He's got to make his place on this world of Apatros. And so when his hammer breaks, this electronic jackhammer thing that he's got, and the other miner tries to move in on it, he's not having it. He cannot afford to show any type of a weakness there, which is like, you're ideal for the Sith with that type of belief, with that type of thing going on. And so yeah, he's not someone who's naive. His eyes are open to the state of the galaxy, and he's aware of exactly what his position is. It's just a matter of figuring out how to get out of there.
Mhm. Yeah, and he's always said that, eventually he wanted to leave Apatros. He wasn't
Right.
sure how, he wasn't sure when, he wasn't sure, what the impetus of that was actually going to be, but he just knew. And that was for me, obviously, I've always said I love a good backstory. And
Mhm.
there's no spoiler alerts necessary here. We know that Des becomes Darth Bane. I mean, that's
Right.
the whole purpose of these novels is to explain how that is. And I love a good backstory. That is my favorite thing of all. And I also love the psychology of what makes people tick. And
Mhm.
so that's what I think a lot of these first chapters really do for us is when it sets up these initial getting to know you kinds of things for Des. It truly is a nature versus nurture kind of crucible that he's here on Apatros, that he's been put into this situation. His dad died, or his mom died at an early age. His dad, who basically hated him, that's where he got his nickname Bane, and just looked at him as, just something to endure. he was able to rise above all of that. And so you can see where eventually how, the breaking of the chains kind of thing comes into play there. And
Right.
so, and what fascinates me as well is, as you said, he's very galaxy, worldly, if you will. He understands what's going on in the galaxy. And I think that that says a lot about him in terms of not being one that just sticks his head in the sand and, or in this case, in a cortosis vein, and just goes about his business and, basically just lives his life. He's paying attention. He's
Hmm.
always paying attention to what's going on around him and how he can make things better. And he also has, of course, that sixth sense or Sith sense, as it were, that allows him to be able to kind of see what's going to happen next. He doesn't understand it at this point, obviously
Right.
his gift, but let's talk about that for just a little bit since we're on the subject of it. These initial sorts of sparks of the dark side or the force. So, when Des talks about knowing where Gerd's hand is going to be and he was able to bite his thumb off right at that moment of time, it was something that he never actually questioned could potentially be the force. But yet, as
Hmm.
we were just talking about, he understands what's out there. Do you think, and this is kind of later on, we come to see that he was not a true believer necessarily in the force, but do you think that he ever entertained notions that he could be force sensitive?
No, this part reminds me, when I was talking a little bit earlier about how Drew Capition took like elements of the Force Awakens, or not the Force Awakens, the Phantom Menace. This
Hmm.
reminds me a bit of Anakin here. The Anakin talks about how he's the only human who can do pod racing here. And it's later Qui-Gon who explains, I believe he's got this ability to use the Force, and it's what makes his reflexes so good. And in this case, I thought it was important the way that Drew wrote these chapters here when he's talking about the fight between Des and Gerd, and then later when he's gambling and he knew that certain cards are going to come up and that he needed to make these plays now. He wrote it in such a way that you knew it was more than just instinct, that it was something else operating. And as Star Wars fans, we can intuit it's the Force there.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, he doesn't understand or to have enough experience with Sith, Jedi, or what like that to realize that this is a mystical power that binds the whole galaxy together, et cetera, as they would tell us. But he does kind of realize that there is a little bit something that he can do there, and he couples this with his other talents that are not the Force, which we'll get into a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, again, it's just it takes eventually someone else pulling it out of him that what to put a label on this gift, but it's there and he's able to take advantage
Hmm.
of it and he knows to.
Yeah, yeah, and again, it's the whole nature versus nurture thing, and I think that that's a good compare and contrast between Anakin and, his latent force abilities being raised by Shmi, someone who was loving and giving, and, you always said that the worst thing about the galaxy is no one ever helps each other. Whereas for Des, his upbringing being very different, very brutal, literally just a dog eat dog kind of world, it's understandable that when he does realize that he's got a gift, that it would be used for the dark side as opposed to, joining the ranks of the Jedi. And I think that that is partially, and I put this in our notes, that Apatros almost acts as a crucible, as a dark side amplifier, like his environment itself was a character shaping him. And, it's a lot of it is because he believes in that there's no such thing as equality.
Mhm.
And so that's part of that too. And there's a conversation that he has while he's playing Sabak that really, really outlines that. So, so yeah, so
Yeah.
let's talk about that world building just a little bit. So, as far as Apatros in general, and also the fact that we see the idea of the outer rim once again.
Mhm.
And you put it in our notes as well that Shami had pointed out the Republic doesn't exist out here. And so,
Right.
again, kind of pulling from the Phantom Menace once again, in that Oro Corporation, essentially, you work for them, but they own you.
Mhm.
So, there's the people that work for Oro Corporation, they still have to pay their rent, they still have to pay their groceries. Everything is at an exorbitant rate. And then you have these Republic soldiers and commanders and things that are coming on world and trying to recruit them to join the Republic. And but it's basically like, well, Oro Corporation still has all of your debt, so why should you join the army only to never get a paycheck, kind of a thing. So, so what did you think about the whole idea of the way that these outer rim territories were kind of forgotten in a lot of ways by the Republic until they needed something?
Yeah, so there's a lot to say there, and you touched on a lot of the things. And one, there is of course with the Aura Corporation, it's very reminiscent of what you would hear about the company store and the villages that the train system would set up, or the mining towns in on our own country would do, and that they would you'd basically be working on credit to spend at the store, and then you would never have enough to do anything else, and so that you were just tied to the store. And that's exactly what the Oro Corporation, I don't know if it's actually Oro, is it ORO, but regardless,
Yeah.
they Drew like is walking the fine line with the way he writes this, which is one more like inconvenience stacked on this would make the whole thing seem utterly ridiculous. But it is just almost believable that, okay, so you work in the mines and you get paid for whatever ore you bring back in, but then if you want supplies, the only place you can get them from is the store, and as you said, the prices are exorbitant there. And not only that, you have to pay for your lodging, and the lodging is terrible. But you can't you can get dock pay for things. You can be told you can't work, and so that's one way they keep you down so that you can't leave. And then they give you just enough entertainment to kind of assuage you. They allow a cantina to be there in the town, and there's gambling in the cantina, but Oro runs the gambling, and they
Mhm.
limit the size of any one hand so that nobody can actually win enough to not mine or escape the mining complex. And not only that, they take a portion of every hand. So they just keep stacking the deck against their workers so that they have no choice but to continue in this lifestyle. And it's this big illusion, but you have no alternative. It's either you do this or you just starve. It may be a miserable existence, but it's an existence. And it becomes a breeding ground for a couple different things. One, the Republic here shows up here and preys on the desperation, which is, hey, we can get you a better life. What they leave out is exactly what you pointed out, that yeah, you can leave and fight for us, but the company still owes your debt. So they're going to get all your wages while you're working for, while you're fighting for the Republic. And should you survive, you may still owe them, and then you're only marginally better off. And then the other side of that is that it creates a breeding ground for discontent with the Republic, so that the Sith can come in and say, "You don't like being oppressed? We're all about freedom here."
Mhm.
And the corporate bigwigs and the wealthy are the ones that are running everything here. We're a brotherhood. It's in our name. Come join us, and we'll help you. We'll help you find your freedom.
Right. And I think that the Republic, the way that they are framed in this part of the book, is that they're a little, not just a little, but they're very much out of touch with what's actually going on in
Mhm.
these outer rim territories. So it almost creates this feeling of hypocrisy. There's like the illusion of what Republic standards are, but they're very much out of touch with the realities of the outer rim. And
Mhm.
so there was one of the quotes is, "You look out for yourself because nobody else will." This is what Des was saying. That's why the Sith keep finding new recruits willing to join them out here. People with nothing feel like they've got nothing to lose. And if the Republic doesn't figure that out pretty soon, the Brotherhood of Darkness is going to win this war, no matter how many Jedi you have leading your army. And Des says that to the commander while they're, playing their sabacc game.
Right.
So
And
yeah,
what I
so it
love
really
about
sets
it
it
when
up.
he says that is that he's making a point, but he's also getting the goat of everybody he's playing cards with. Because
Yeah.
at this point in Dest's existence, he has no love for the Sith or the Republic in here. he's manipulating them. He's trying to get them off their game. It's one of his skills that I kind of mentioned earlier. Is he's smart. Everyone assumes that he's just a brute because he's the largest guy in the room, even 2 meters tall, and has got muscle on top of muscle, the strongest guy in the camp. And he sits down and starts playing cards. And then the Republic starts trying to recruit him, and he's using their pitches against them to tell them what's wrong with their public, to poke holes in their public, to make it not as honorable as what they believe it to be. And so they quit concentrating on the game and they start concentrating on him, and they start playing badly in the Sabak game. So he's able to start mounting up some wins, and it gets an opportunity, which doesn't happen in these chapters, but he's aiming for that jackpot that builds over the course of the game. And everyone else doesn't realize that he's just goading them on with this. He is the smartest guy at that table.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, as you mentioned earlier, his gift with the Force is definitely amplified by his other abilities. He is so wicked smart. He knows how to manipulate people. He knows what to say, but he knows when to say it too. And, as you pointed out, he's just goading them. So, this whole game with the soldiers, the Sabak game, he's constantly playing devil's advocate with these soldiers at the table. He's pointing out that there's, heroes and villains on both sides. He's questioning everything about the Jedi, and there's some other things that we could get into here in just a second. But as we're talking about the Sabak game, let's back up a couple paces and talk a little bit about this cantina. So, as you mentioned, there's this cantina that's operates basically to serve the Oro miners. And so it's run by this Neimoidian named Groshik. And so they even talk about his specific schedule. So and they use military time, which I thought was a nice touch. So he, runs the cantina for the first shift versus the second shift workers. And they all work, it's basically like clockwork, and they're 12 hours here, 12 hours there. And then he's there, mainly Groshik is there to pick up on the first shift when they get off, and then there so that the second shift miners can come into the cantina beforehand. But Groshik and Des kind of have this relationship where I think Groshik really does kind of see a little between the lines, if you will, on Des, and he's known him his whole life. And so after this whole incident with Gerd, Des goes in there, and of course it's kind of a ghost town because it's in between, the shift. But Des realizes, okay, I'm going to get cleaned up. I should rest, but I'm going to see if I can go make some money with the Sabak. And so as soon as he sits down, Groshik pours him a drink, and they have this long-standing, basically agreement that if Groshik pours him a drink and he doesn't ask for it, he doesn't have to pay for it. Right. So then he's talking to Groshik a little bit, about all of these things. But the cantina itself, everything else around there is just drab. There's no need for anything to be ostentatious or anything like that. But yet here's this cantina that Groshik has built this false second and third floor onto it with this really garish purple dome so that it stands out above everything else. And so that sets the stage for this Sabak game. And for me personally, what I loved about this section was not only that we got to see Des in action with his intelligence and his manipulation and kind of being able to narrate what the state of the galaxy is at the time, but just learning how to play Sabak. I thought that was the coolest, way to work that in there, ever. But what did you think about Groshik and the cantina and the whole setting and his relationship with Des?
Well, it's interesting. The thing about him is that we like him because he's helping out our protagonist, right? And Des hasn't done anything so far in this novel other than get, someone tried to move in on his claim. Des fought back, bit off his thumb, which gets reattached. But he's basically been forced not to work on the mines until this other worker who's been injured can get back and work again. And so, okay, so we've got some sympathy for Des in here. And then Des wanders into the cantina, and Groshek treats him well, gives him a free drink, kind of gives him some advice about what's going on with these Republic naval officers that are in here gambling, and is been kind of like the surrogate parent for Des and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're inclined to like Groshek, and I can't remember everything that happens over the next few chapters, but I don't want to get into it because we're not there yet. But here's the thing that kind of was nagging at me, is that for all of that, Groshek is taking advantage of all these miners as well. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
He's here in this company town running this cantina. Now, he doesn't have anything to do with the gambling because ORO has set that up for themselves, and they're controlling it so they can maintain control of the miners. But he still lets it happen. He's still the one selling all the drink. I mean, that's more money that most of these miners can't afford to spend anyway on this. They're just accumulating more debt when they do so. And so while it's nice, he's kind of taken Des under his wing. I mean, I don't want to completely discredit the guy, but I don't want to make him out to be too much of an angel, because really he's, whether he realizes it or not, he's part of the system that's going on around him, taking advantage of all these miners. It's just that he happens to be softer on one of them, is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, they had to make him Neimoidian, which we've
Mm-hmm.
traditionally seen are very good with money, I guess you could say. Very stingy kind of thing. But, I think he's perfect for this role because, of course, he's going to stick it to these naval officers that are coming in there. But it also strikes me that it's very traditionally Western feeling. You know what I
Yes.
mean? That the cantina, the bartender who is really nice to the guy that comes in that, maybe lost his cattle or whatever. And then the nasty sheriffs that come in and kind of puts it to him, sort of thing. So I just really liked that about Groshek's character. And like you said, later on, we get a little bit more enlightenment about what Groshek really knows.
Right.
So we'll definitely put a pin in that one. But let's get into, while they're talking through the Sabacc game and they're playing this whole game together, the discussion of the Jedi and the Force come up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of get our first glimpse into the way that the Jedi are portrayed in this book. And so what we understand is that the Jedi are, soldiers, not just peacekeepers. That sounds familiar. Or guardians. We learn a little name drop General Hoth, who's the leader of the Jedi. And they talk a little bit about the Jedi versus the Sith and their use of the Force. And one of the things that Death said is, why is this war taking so long if the Force is so powerful? So
Mm-hmm.
again, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about Death's feelings and thoughts about the Force in general, is that he's a little skeptical, when it comes to what the Force is and that type of thing. And so there's this initial discussion of the Jedi. They are all about peace and wisdom, they're defenders, versus the way that these Republic officers are talking about the Sith is that they are all about just anger and violence, they're bloodthirsty, those types of things. So how did you feel about that, comparing and contrasting of what we know of the Jedi at this point in time in the novel, and how they're portrayed, and the Sith as well?
Yeah, so there's a lot said here, and Des does an interesting job of compartmentalizing all of it and over the course of this discussion. And so, yeah, the Republic shows up here. They look at Des and his like as the bumpkins, right? You kind of made mention of the Western town. These are the guys that come in on the train, from one coast to the other. And, here they are bringing some sort of enlightenment, gracing everybody with their presence is what it comes down to. And Des just lets them do that. But then he interjects these comments that this all happens while they're making the pitch. They're trying to recruit him. There's a lieutenant there at the table who's been trying to get in a few ideas with him that, hey, why not get off this world? And we can show you some things and stuff like that. And he doesn't want to exchange one master for another in that route. And so he's having this conversation, as we were talking about earlier. Part of it is just to distract these Republic naval officers from the game that's going
Mhm.
on. And it works under this. But he also is making good points from in the sense that, yeah, it's not as easy as what you're talking about. You claim that the Jedi are peacekeepers and stuff like that. Well, they're essentially making the same mistake that the Jedi make in the prequel trilogy, right? You know, they get involved in a war that they should not have been involved. They should not have been fighting the war on the behalf of the Republic. They should have been serving the Force, as we understand it. I've got some contentions with that, but that's a different podcast, not this one. And second, it is way too sophistic to make angels out of one side and demons out of the other, or devils, I guess would
Mhm.
be more appropriate. And he sees right through that, because the commander is like, the Jedi seek to preserve peace. They serve the cause of justice. They believe all beings, regardless of species or gender, are created equal. And and meanwhile, the Sith are described as bloodthirsty, as you said. They're just out
Mhm.
there causing chaos and havoc and whatever. And then you know, Des points back in their face. It's like, well, you're bringing up all this equality that doesn't exist, and the Sith believe that the weak serve the strong, and if you're one of the strong, that sounds pretty good. He's one of the strong, right
Right.
there. So for
Mhm.
him, he's the strongest guy in camp. He's also one of the smartest guys in camp, and given the right opportunity, he'd be running that camp if it was not from the oppression of the system that the Republic is put down on top of stuff. And the Jedi serve that Republic. So no, there's no way he's going to like these guys. And
Exactly.
nor would he. Should he?
And that's again, what I wanted to make sure we pointed out, and you did a great job, is again, Death's just playing devil's advocate with all of these things. And again, the commander saying that the only thing that the Sith seek is power. They believe the natural order of the galaxy is for the weak to serve the strong. And as you pointed out, Des said, sounds pretty good if you're one of the strong.
Yeah.
So, that sets us up right there for, not just Des being strong of body, but also of mind and of spirit and, eventually in the force too.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so I love that whole setting up of that, and all during the sabacc game, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So, I know, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the culmination of all this is not in these 3 chapters.
Of
so,
course.
and so that's a good tease for the next episode in this series here. But uh, you know, I that just like when we do our movie series, we've only done 1 episode. This is our first episode in this book club, but breaking it down and only looking at a few chapters at a time, I think is really useful for identifying some of the early themes and the groundwork that gets laid out through the course of this book and the trilogy for that matter here.
Mhm.
And really, because if you read this whole book in one fell swoop, it's Des was a minor, he became a Sith Lord. But when you stop and that's what interests us, right? We want to know about the guy who started the Rule of Two, what he was like and what all these things he did. But if you read this carefully here, you can really see where he's coming from. And at least at this stage, like I said, he's not a good guy, but he is the protagonist of this book. And you can sympathize with him and his plight right now. He'll make some decisions later that we aren't going to like, but again, he's the one we're following.
Right, right. And, obviously we are invested in him. And you brought up the idea of having some empathy for
Mm-hmm.
him, or sympathy, if you will. And, do you, I guess there is a point where we stop sympathizing with him, as you said,
Right.
but yet we're still drawn into that wicked web of his. And you can still see things from his perspective, which I think is so genius when it comes to this novel in general. Is that I know for me, I was hook, line, and sinker for Bane and all of his teachings because of the way that I think Drew Karpyshyn, or Karpyshyn, as you said, it's we got to figure out exactly how to say his last name, but how he sets Bane up in these initial chapters, that you want to give him the benefit of the doubt. You want to root for him. You want him to be successful. And at least I know for myself, I definitely, find myself constantly feeling that way. So it's sort of this chain reaction of just such, a delicious sort of catastrophe that we know that's going to happen, but we love watching it unfold at the same time.
Right. He's got qualities we admire right now. He's
Hmm.
strong. He is looking for, at least in some aspects, he's looking for the just outcome here. With when he gets attacked by his fellow miner, he enacts a little bit, he maybe goes too far, but he defends himself and he comes out the victor in that situation. Later, when it comes to the card game, he studies his opponent. He does intelligent things. He argues effectively while he's there. And he's taking advantage of people that are trying to take advantage of him. So we admire those qualities, but he's going to use those same qualities later for things that we aren't going to like so much.
Right.
Even if he can make a convincing argument about them. So.
Yes, definitely.
Mhm.
Definitely. So I know we're probably getting close to where we need to wrap this up,
Mhm.
but what other observations do you have in these 3 chapters of the prologue that really stuck with you at this point?
Well, here's the thing about Bane, and we're gonna, to kind of preview some things to come in this, is that there's with these heroes, it's not an interesting story if they just go. I use the hero as a substitute for the word protagonist. If they don't have some sort of flaws in here, we aren't getting what his big flaw is written out for us right now. That the thing that he's going to have to overcome, other than you know, he does have a little bit of a superiority complex when it comes to this. And he is dwelling on the bad things that happened to him, which, I mean, who can blame him given the situation? But again, a guy with his qualities, his traits, maybe if he had been out of the world, he, that was in the core, he wouldn't have an opportunity to become someone who's exceptional and really, because he would have been amongst other people that wouldn't drive him to use those traits the way he is here. But again, just without diving into what's going to happen the rest of this book, start thinking. I would advise the people who are reading this for the first time or read it before and you're joining us for this thing, start thinking about what Bane's flaws are in this. He's not a tragic, he in the sense that he's going to fail in this book, but he's not perfect in any
Mhm.
sense of the word.
For sure. And the big thing I think with him too and his original upbringing here is, I wrote down 3 words that I feel really sum up the prologue in these especially these first 3 chapters, and that's brutality, survival, and awakening.
Hmm.
And the brutality comes in is because for him, he sees how the miners are expendable and violence is basically normalized from day one. That it was almost encouraged in a lot of ways. And he also experienced a lot of that violence. Survival. Des isn't really dreaming of destiny just yet. Yeah, we said he wants to get off the planet, but he's at this point just kind of trying to endure a world that's just been stacked against him. And then with awakening, the force is there, as we said, it's simmering under the surface even before he has a language for it. So he hasn't even put a name to a face just yet. So I think that just in summary kind of shows us where Des is and where his story is starting at this point. Would you agree?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you think we should wrap it up at this point?
I think we've got a good grip on this book, and this is the perfect place to wrap it up for this edition.
Awesome.
All right. Well then, Jay, good job leading the conversation, and thank you all for joining this episode of Podcast Stardust and our first installment in the Darth Bane Book Club series. We hope you've enjoyed it, and if you want to make sure you get the upcoming installments, we're going to do 9 more. We're going to break this down into 10 over the course of the year. That's the current plan. So that we can kind of group chapters into certain thematic elements. Jay did a great job outlining this for us for the year, so I can't wait to get to it. But as I was starting to say, if you want to make sure you don't miss any of the future installments, the best way you can do that is by subscribing to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. We're pretty much available anywhere. And if you have a preferred podcatcher and we're not there, let me know and I'll see what I need to do to get the show there. And once you've done that, and if, like I said, if you're enjoying this, we'd appreciate your ratings, reviews, especially if it's like a place like Apple Podcasts. It does help get the show in front of other people, especially when there's ratings and reviews and things like that they can look at. And then I would encourage you to head over to retrozap.com where you can find the entire back catalog of the show, all previous 994 shows. And while you're there, there's some other great shows on the network, such as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. case files. That's active. We got Enjoy stuff. Superhero Suite just dropped an episode recently, so go check those shows out as well. Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found online.
Of course. So we are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And if you are reading along with us, please do us a favor. Snap some photos. What version of the book do you have? Do you have the original cover? Do you have the legacy version? What does your bookmark look like? You know, if you're like cozying up with your dog or cat, we'd love to see those kinds of things. What kind of coffee mug are you drinking out of? And tag us at Podcast Stardust. And you can also follow us on our Pinterest boards, and there's some Darth Bane kinds of things over there as well. And our YouTube outlets, which is YouTube and YouTube Music. And you can also drop us a line at our email address, which is podcaststardust@gmail.com. So if you want to send us your photos there, you can definitely do that. And we're also approaching our 1000th episode, and we need some listener questions. So please head on over and put those into that email as well. And speaking of things that you can help the podcast with, you can head over to our TeePublic link and you can pick up some Podcast Stardust swag. We have 7 different show logo designs available and all kinds of fun things. So once again, hit up that link in our show notes.
All right. You want to let everybody in on what's going on with cosplay?
Sure. So my Instagram account, which is j.snipscosplay, is where you'll find all of the different characters that I do cosplay, including Ahsoka, the fourth sister, which is my big baddie, and my original concept Mandalorian, and my 2 different versions of Hera, as well as some other fun things. So once again, that's at j.snipscosplay.
All right. So upcoming on the show on Friday, we are shaking up the format a little bit with an edition of World Between Worlds. So that is the segment where Jay rounds up Star Wars fashion and lifestyle products from around the galaxy. And I think this week we're going to try and focus on some Valentine's Day ideas. And then on Monday, we'll getting back into the Clone Wars rewatch. So make sure you hang out with that. Just to pull back the curtain, we're recording episodes early, so I don't know that we're going to have any news. So that's why we've kind of altered things up. But we'll get back to the news next week, assuming that there is any. But with all that said, thanks for listening to episode 995 of Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be